Hello, and let me just start off this video by saying happy Transgender Awareness Week to all of those trans and non-binary folks. You're all freaking awesome and valuable and loved and precious. Don't forget it. So, on that note, I would like to talk about my own personal journey as a transgender man. One of the questions that pertains to this topic that I got was from Stephanie on my Facebook, and she asked about what the differing perspectives and reactions to me coming out in a faith context were. So I'm going to talk about that today. Yay, fun stuff. There were some not so great reactions, but there were also some like super positive reactions, and so I think it's really important to also highlight those. So, getting right into it. I grew up in a conservative Christian community. It was very close-knit, quite sheltered. I had like the same group of friends from the time I was in kindergarten to grade 9. I went to a Christian school, went to church every Sunday, the whole 9 yards. So growing up, I wasn't taught a lot about what queer identities were, other than that there was homosexuality and that it was essentially bad. So I kind of had a feeling that there was something different about me. From the time that I was a kid, I was always like interested in what the boys were doing, and I wanted to wear boys' clothes. And whenever I played role-playing games with my friends, I was always the dad or the brother or the boyfriend. And I think it was just kind of like chalked up to like, well, she's just a tomboy. And I kind of took that label upon myself too, because I didn't have words to be able to explain the way that I felt. It was never a question of like, I want to be a boy. I started to realize that I was queer in junior high when I started to develop feelings for a girl. And I didn't tell anybody for 2 years because I was so terrified of what the response would be. I had seen people be the subject of gossip and rumors because it was thought that maybe they were gay. That was something that really, really terrified me, was that I could end up being a topic of conversation among people. So I wanted to avoid that at all costs. And so I tried to be as feminine as possible, and I didn't talk about feelings that I felt towards other girls. Obviously, that was super damaging. I fell into kind of like a downward spiral mental health wise. I was really, really depressed. I had really, really bad anxiety. I was super confused. Because I didn't have words for what I was feeling. And I felt really, really isolated, and I didn't think that there was anybody else in the world that felt the way that I did. Leaving junior high and going into high school, I went from this like Christian bubble to going to a public art school that was like extremely open. That was both very exciting for me, but also extremely daunting. And I think it was there that I realized like, okay, this is what I want. This is who I am. And like I said, that was really scary because I then, in admitting that, I had to deal with it. Because it was so like, it was like culture shock to me. I realized really quickly that drugs and alcohol were going to be a means for me to be able to socialize. I didn't really know how to establish relationships. I had had the same friends for, a decade. So like making new relationships with people who were different than the circle than I was used to was really difficult. And so drugs and alcohol were for sure a way that I felt I was able to relate to people. And also it helped me to be able to push my identity aside and kind of ignore the things that I was feeling so that I didn't have to face it. I was worried about the kinds of things I would have to face in my church community and at home. And obviously I still had ties to the Christian people that I did life with up to this point. And so I was really afraid of rejection. And then upon starting to use drugs and alcohol regularly, I think I started to care about anything in general, including myself, less and less. I ended up getting so drunk that I could no longer be in school. And so at that point, I kind of just gave up on myself. And I purposely cut ties with a lot of people that I went to school with because I was afraid of their reaction. But it's natural for people to have those fears and to not feel like they would be safe to openly share the way that they feel. But I do regret that because I feel like I didn't give people the chance to react in a positive way. And I think that the majority of them would have reacted positively. And I know that there are a lot of people from that school who I do maintain contact with, and they have expressed that they support me and that they're proud of me. And that has been really, really huge for me because, at one point I didn't know if that was something that I would ever receive. I decided to move out of my mom's house, which was like the only shred of accountability I had had at that point. And I also felt like a sense of like, if I have my independence and I don't live at home, then I don't have to answer to anyone if and when I do come out. I started kind of just like staying at friends' places a lot of people who also were making not the best choices with their lives, and who were also struggling like I was. And so I was using drugs quite regularly. It had shifted from alcohol and marijuana use to using harder drugs and on a daily basis, to the point that I was ending up in extremely scary situations with people that I didn't know, people that I certainly couldn't trust, just surviving day to day for a couple of years. In this time, I had sort of told people that I was hanging out with that I felt like I was a boy. But you know, we were all like partying all the time, so we never really took anything seriously. And church was for sure something that I wasn't even thinking about. I was still really wrestling with the idea of what my faith looked like, and at this point, I sort of just turned that off. I felt like God had already rejected me, and so why would I even give any attention to that? I eventually got to a point where I had gotten arrested for possession, and basically I was looking at either I have something on my record for the rest of my life, or I go to a 90-day treatment program for youth. At this time, I was 17. While in treatment, I realized being clean was something that would be an asset to me, and I felt a lot better about myself. And it was the first time where I was like really devoted to working on myself. All these things that I had just like denied to feel for so long, and had numbed out with drugs, including my gender identity, my sexual identity. At this point, I'd kind of accepted that I was, you know, interested in women. I'd been dating women for a couple of years. My gender identity was still something I was struggling with. I knew that I wanted to transition at this point, but I hadn't come out to my family. And it was while in rehab, and I'm so lucky and blessed to have had this opportunity to be surrounded by professionals, and in this little bubble when I came out. I was able to have a family counseling session. I'm not gonna lie, it was really, really difficult. It was super emotional. In regards to reactions from the church, my family had a really, really hard time with it initially. It was really, really difficult for me. There was a lot of denial and there was fighting. But then later on, you know, that shifted, and there's an openness and a willingness to communicate and to move forward. And they were able to support me in deciding to medically and physically transition, which was obviously huge and life-changing for me. And at this time, when I had started to present more masculine in the church that I was going to, I did have some relationships to some of the other youth that were going there, and they kind of just phased me out. And to this day, I don't really know if that was like preferable. I kind of wish that I could have had conversations with people, but a lot of people I think felt more comfortable to just pretend like I didn't exist anymore. And maybe that was the best thing for me at the time too, because I probably wouldn't have been equipped to emotionally handle those conversations. This happened just before I left the church for a while. Upon being in recovery and coming out, I realized really quickly that I could not go back to living my life the way that I was, because I was living a lie. And if I was going to stay clean from drugs, I needed to honor the fact that I was who I was and allow that to shine through. At this time, I still wasn't going to church, but it was something that I was interested in doing again. And so I had started seeking out communication with church leaders in the city that I live in. And I actually met with a couple of them. So one of them in particular, we sat down, we had coffee. I told him my situation. I was just like, hey, I'm interested in like becoming a part of a faith community again. I'm just wondering like what your status is in terms of allowing LGBTQ people into your community. And he was like, and this is a very like classic response. He was like, well, of course we will love you and we will accept you, but we cannot accept your lifestyle, which essentially means the opposite of we will accept you. Love is not actually love if it has any conditions. And so that was a very easy nope for me. Those are churches I obviously didn't decide to go to, and I was kind of scared off from that for a while. About 3 years ago, my mom and I started attending a church together. I had done a lot of work internally on my healing, and I felt that I was safe to walk into a space like that again, even if I wasn't well received. And also the fact that I pass as male quite well now, and I did at the time too. I didn't think I would raise any questions. So my perspective was I would go in stealth mode and no one would actually know that I was queer. But once I had developed relationships and got these people to love me, then I would present them with that, because then they couldn't write it off as an issue, because they would already love me and they would then have to deal with it. There's importance in viewing LGBTQ identities as identities and as people and not issues, because that's the case. You know, this wasn't an affirming church. It was a Baptist church. There are a lot of non-affirming churches by name that just maybe haven't had that conversation yet and just aren't quite there yet. But there are people within that community who do know queer people and love queer people and affirm their lifestyles, or they are open-minded people and they have the potential to get there. And that's more or less what the case was at this church that I went to. I told a few people there that I was trans, and pretty much across the board. I mean, there were people who had questions that asked them respectfully, and, you know, they wrestled with it, and I tried to help them to be able to make sense of stuff. You know, I'm still making sense of stuff too. That's just being a human. So we got to kind of do that together and both be involved in that conversation, which is really cool for me, because in the past, I know that I've just been the topic of gossip. But other than that, I didn't ever really have that type of confrontation with people from a church context, other than people on the internet that I didn't actually have a relationship with. I would actively seek out people on the internet to argue with, which in part was my fault, and then I would be devastated and super broken up, and I would feel like convicted in trying to solve this issue and like get people to be nice and accepting, and that's just like way too much for anybody to take on. So I had to stop doing that for the sake of my mental well-being. But the fact that it was only those people who were mean to me and rejected me for who I was, they weren't people that I was like actively relational with. And so that has been huge for me, because I know that's not the case with everybody. The majority of people who are having a hard time accepting LGBTQ identities are people who have been brought up with the same rhetoric that homosexuality is bad and that gender roles are to be adhered by for their whole lives. And even for me, as like a queer person coming to realize that I was trans, I had a hard time accepting myself, because I'd been immersed in that culture my whole life. And so I understand it would be earth-shattering as a religious person to have that one thing called into question, because then you have to look at your whole entire faith and kind of question that, and that's really difficult for people. So I never really hold it against people. I just think that even if those are beliefs that are held, while I don't agree with them, I think that it's still important to treat each other with respect and with love, and to respect people who are on a different journey than you. That's not to excuse discrimination, because I don't believe that that does adhere to the basic level of respect that I think people deserve. That being said, I do just want to say I feel like the church, as a broad thing, is progressing. The people are open, at the very least, to having conversations. And since I've done the work and I am at a point where I have self-awareness and I love myself, and that's not at risk of being compromised, I feel as though I am in a position now to be able to have those conversations with people, even if it doesn't really work out. Because people need to be in relationship to fully know and understand. With that, thank you very much for taking the time to watch me rant about my life and my feelings and my thoughts and my opinions. If you have anything that you would like to know about, drop a comment with your question. Make sure you subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on other cool stuff that I will be tackling. And as always, thank you very much. I very much appreciate you. I couldn't do this thing without your feedback and without your community, and I hope that we can continue to facilitate that community together in love. Much love, as always. Catch you next time. And I wish